In the last video, we talked about reviewing the results of the community needs assessment, and we defined program goals and objectives. So the next step in program planning is actually to develop the program. So thinking about all the components that you want to include in the intervention or program, and getting all of those materials developed. So these are some aspects that you should consider when you're thinking about designing a program or an intervention. You always want to base the intervention on evidence. You want to have an evidence-based intervention. So that means going through the literature and making sure that the foundation of your intervention has a scientific rationale behind it. And the next thing you want to think about is you want to think about what types of methods are you going to use to implement your project. Are you going to be developing social media campaign or posts? Are you going to be developing maybe it's an environmental intervention and offering more fruits and vegetables of a certain kind within a community environment to increase fruit and vegetable intake. So maybe it's going to be an environmental intervention, or maybe it's going to be a traditional lessons where you are teaching a class, whether that's online or in person, trying to teach skills that will help people to make behavior changes and to help them be motivated to make changes. So you have to think through really what are you trying to accomplish, thinking about your goals and objectives, and then thinking about what kinds of methods or what approach are you going to take to be able to meet those goals and objectives. Then you have to think about creating materials that you need to in order to implement the project and planning that out of how that's going to be created. And thinking about that, you want to create a timeline. So you may have a goal in mind of your program is going to be a 2-year program, and you need to outline a timeline of when you're going to create materials, when you're going to implement the program and collect data, and then when you're analyze the data and what you're going to then do with that data, and whether that's a research publication or a report for your organization, or also maybe you're going to give feedback to other parties who are interested in that information, so maybe other stakeholders, or you might also use it for advocacy work. And then one thing you have to be constantly thinking about is what your project resources are. So who's on your project team that's going to help carry out the project? Do you have ability to hire more staffing to help implement the project? What are your funds that you have to be able to implement the project? All of those things go into how you're going to carry out the project. One thing I wanted to mention is that when you're developing a program, if you're going to be doing some kind of education, so traditional lesson plans in the classroom or online, or maybe even social media posts, you can pull from other resources that are already available. So things like Choose My Plate, Dietary Guidelines, Kids Eat Right, What's Cooking, USDA Mixing Bowl, and there's other toolkits. There are a lot of other materials online you can get through federal health agencies like CDC or USDA. You can sometimes get it from organizations that are reputable, and they have materials that are available for others to use. That's one thing you would want to make sure that you have permission to use the materials that you're thinking of using. Anything that's government is a public domain, meaning that anyone has access to those. If it's something from an organization, if they don't label it as being as anyone can use it in a community setting, then you would want to get permission from them. Sometimes, though, you might find a curriculum that really is quite relevant for the most part, but it maybe needs to be adapted just a little bit to really meet the needs of your target population. So I'll give you an example. I'm working on a project right now with Dr. LaCheminot and Utah State University Extension. And Utah State University Extension has a curriculum that's been developed and tested and validated and shown to be effective curriculum that they've used with low-income populations in the state of Utah, and it's through the SNAP Ed program. And so we received some funding through a community foundation in Utah, and the funding is for us to actually adapt that curriculum that Utah State Extension is created and we're adapting it to a specific low-income population, specifically homeless individuals who are living in Provo and at the Food and Care Coalition. So we're actually going to be adapting a pre-existing material to meet the needs of a unique population where, because they're in a living situation where they may not have the same storage or cooking facilities as someone who is low income living in the community, we're going to adapt those materials as part of the intervention. So that just gives you an example of how you can take some curriculum and modify it to meet the needs for a new program. This is from your book. This is showing you an example of a lesson plan. So you may find that there are no pre-existing materials that really meet the needs of the program you want to implement. And so you're going to have to develop your own lesson plan. This is just giving you an idea of how a lesson plan might be built together. One thing you want to always consider is when you're creating your own materials, make sure that they're evidence-based. So that is really key. We want to make it sure that we're teaching the science. So you can see here that there's some pre-instructions for the person giving the lesson. There's objectives they want to meet for the class and how much time they're going to spend on different aspects and activity. And this probably could even be a little more detailed in helping the individual or the teacher know exactly what types of terms should be used. So for instance, how should a whole grain be defined? They could actually put in the definition of a whole grain here. Another aspect of developing a program, as I mentioned, is creating a timeline, or it can also be called a time and activity chart, or it can be called a Gantt chart. This is from your book as well, and it gives you the task that's to be accomplished by the program team, and then the actual timeline. In this case, it's years, and they're showing you, 12 months of the year, and then indicating when different aspects, different tasks will be accomplished within this time frame. This time frame is really dependent on your specific project and what the plan is for implementing it. Once you've developed your program plan, then you want to think about what's your management system look like, who's going to be responsible for which parts of the project. And I'm going to show you an example from the Utah County WIC case study. This was our personnel structure. So it was a collaboration and a partnership between BYU and WIC. At the WIC clinic, we had the Provo WIC clinic director at the time was Lori Galvez, and she had responsibility over the WIC interns and the graphic designer, who was her twin sister. And BYU, we had two individuals, so myself and Chachi Tang from the Department of IT. Chachi Tang had primary responsibility over the IT students, and I had primary responsibility over the nutrition and dietetic students. The other aspect that we had to consider is how we were going to manage the data that we were collecting. So we had an online database that stored all the behind the scenes development of the pages that went into the online classes. We had the IT team set up Google Analytics to see the kind of traffic on the pages and how much time people were spending on the online classes. We had those pre and post survey to see whether or not any of the behavioral or attitudinal changes were made by the individuals based on taking the class itself and knowledge increased. We also did auto recording and transcription for focus groups that we did. And then open coding methods are ways that we would manage the data. And then also using software that would be both for qualitative and quantitative statistical software. So these are the kind of things you want to set up ahead of time. You want to know who's going to have what responsibility and what your overall structure looks like. Who are your human resources? And then thinking about how you're collecting data, how are you going to manage that data collection in an organized way that you can then analyze the findings once you've collected the data. So with that, I will end this section, and next time we'll continue on thinking about securing funding and grant writing.